Good afternoon, everybody. It's really great to see all these people here. And I was just saying that it's something nice that we learned from the pandemic is actually to organize webinars, and it's going to be so cool to have all these people together during one and a half hour on a very gray afternoon in the Netherlands, at least. So welcome all to this webinar about activist teaching. My name is Elisabeth Raj. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the chair of the Dutch Anthropology Association. And that's the organization that's organizing this webinar. And if I'm distracted, that's because I'm multitasking, letting people in as I'm talking. So let me see. In this webinar, we are going to discuss, to explore what activist teaching is, what it means, how we can, how the people that are present here, that are spotlighted here in webinar, actually use it, how they do it, how they do activist teaching, and how, activist teaching can actually be a way of engaging with feelings of powerlessness, of hopelessness that at least we have experienced, students sometimes experience as we teach them about justice issues or big problems, climate change, climate crisis, cases of privilege and power. So how can we use activist teaching? How does it work to engage with these people, feelings, experiences that students have? So very briefly, activist teaching combines teaching to think critically about larger macro level issues with teaching strategies for social change and engaging in specific, concrete, and very tangible, at times, forms of action, of engaging in social change. And in many occasions, it's also has like this commitment to self-reflection as a way to develop the self as a site for social change. So this is our very basic understanding of what activist teaching is. And in this webinar, we have invited these 4 scholars that you see spotlighted here to to reflect on how such reflexive, critical, and transformative forms of learning and teaching can be practiced and experienced within the walls of the neoliberal university. So I'm very happy to present very briefly to you these 4 speakers. I have them here because this is also the weird thing about webinars. It looks different for everyone. So I just start with my own list. So our first speaker is Ozan Alakboklar. I hope it didn't go that well, my pronunciation. Okay, good enough. He works at the Utrecht University in the Netherlands. And then we have Hennebes Bolsbjerg. She works at the Aarhus University in Denmark. Then we have Lina Katen. She works at Aalborg University, also in Denmark. And then my colleague Michiel Keunen, who works at Wageningen University, also in the Netherlands. So I sent some questions to our speakers to prepare, so they won't be presenting PowerPoints, but it will more be like a structured or more or less structured Q&A. But they could prepare for some questions, but it might also develop in other ways than we have foreseen. But the first question is a little bit fixed, and that is I would like to invite the 4 speakers to explore and share with us what activist teaching means and how they bring that in practice in their daily lives as lecturers, as academics. So I would like to give Ozan the floor first to share a little bit about this experience.
So hi everyone, it is really great to be here with colleagues who are interested in this topic, and I'm really excited to share my reflection on my experiences. Very briefly about me, my name is Ozan Alakavuklar. I prefer pronouncing his, and I'm from originally Turkey. Quite some time I lived in New Zealand, and since 2019 I've been working for School of Governance in Utrecht University. So for me, activist teaching actually is really doing teaching for social change, and there are multiple layers and levels, at least based on my experience. In the course, I would like to give more details, but for this also I need to give it a background that I graduated from a business administration department, which I was not that happy, but at least there were some spaces about organization studies, management and organization studies. And when we look at the general tendency in management and organization studies, it has its kind of origin mostly coming from the United States, which kind of gives a perspective of the corporation as the dominant form or the preferred model, which is a particular form of organizing economy and the social relations. And there were some taken for granted assumptions which really bothered me during my undergrad and postgrad education. And after doing my PhD, then I was not really happy kind of continuing this kind of conversation or kind of reproducing the same kind of discourse around how we can understand management and organization. And the introduction for me, or the entry point for me, was alternative organizations. And what this means then, alternative organization, what is the problematization? It's only the corporation form, it's only the hierarchical relations, it's top-down kind of decision-making, or is it more about putting these kind of organizational forms into broader social relations? So that's actually where my critical, alternative, reflexive teaching journey began. And my first official post was in New Zealand. Luckily, there were already kind of discussions because New Zealand is a post-colonial settler society, and there were lots of discussions about the origins of knowledge, indigenous knowledge, and how we can mobilize these kind of knowledges to introduce the contradictions and challenges that we already see at the macro level, but also at the societal and organizational level. So with these kind of perspectives, I got into teaching like simply management and organizations, or business and society, business ethics. These were all open, at least open, so for this kind of discussions or critical interventions. So for me, these were the beginning points in terms of bringing more critical and alternative perspectives. For instance, just to give an example, when you look at management organization studies, I began with the problematization of mainstream assumptions, which were really apolitical, ahistorical. And then by problematizing this, I invited my students to know more about other ways of explaining what we see in this kind of organizational relations. That was one thing. So I introduced, for instance, critical political economic relations, that what is the role of management in this, or the manager, for instance, in an organizational context, is the subject or the object of power. That's kind of new for this kind of students, because the general narrative is that generally the heroic, individualistic kind of manager who is really powerful and can, initiate changes and have a large overview. That's the kind of dominant narrative, I would say. Of course, I'm simplifying a bit. So my intention was to begin with this kind of conversations. And jumping forward, I realized that actually we need really completely different understanding of the management and organizational education. And after experimenting a bit in the New Zealand context, in the Netherlands, with my colleagues, we developed a new program, which we call Organizing Social Impact. And this is something I want to talk a bit further, because the ethos of this program begins with that we are having a crisis. We are having a crisis of climate, we are having a crisis of social inequality, and also, we can add this pandemic, we can add this ongoing armed conflict, and then how we can respond to that. And what is the role of education in this? Are we going to keep the education confined within the confined walls of university, or whether we will carry this knowledge where the practice taking place in different forms, in different ways of organizing? And can we imagine a theory and praxis intervention so that we can make sense of the grand challenges at the forefront, and whether this can be an opportunity to learn together with the society, with societal actors, but also with some theoretical interventions. This is the kind of general overview I would say, and I'm happy to delve into details. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ozan. Sounds like, yeah, well, I knew a little bit about your master program. It sounds very, very interesting and a little bit alike of what we do in Wageningen, but on a smaller scale. But before we go to Wageningen, I would like to invite, yeah, Bess, would you like to go first and share a little bit about what activist teaching means to you?
So thanks for inviting me. I already feel that my experience of doing activist teaching or teaching activism is much more limited. Right now, I'm not having a teaching semester, but I was so lucky actually to do some kind of experiments together with you, Lina, at the University of Copenhagen at the Department of Sociology, where we had a summer course called Researching Social Change, which was actually fully devoted to actualize social change in different ways. And I think we'll go further into that. But my take on doing activism through teaching is most of all a sense of valuing a subjective experience. So involving students in having to share in a very, like you have to create an environment where sharing is possible, but having an invitation to actually using your experience, your own subjective way of living life as part of your knowledge building. And from there on, actually trying to empower the different agents in the room to have a say on things. And that's much more into your kind of field, Lina, having this sense of a theoretical way of actually using the subjective experiences to reflect upon what is being taught. There is still a kind of grounding into an experiential realm when discussing certain societal issues. So that's, I think, a kind of introduction for now. Maybe a slight reflection more. I've always been, when I've been engaged in research, I have an eye for how is this kind of knowledge that I'm part of producing being used, how to turn research into actions. And I guess that this course with actually trying to provoke or initiate some kind of change taking place was also coming from this sense of frustration that you can produce knowledge and knowledge and knowledge and never is going to be put into action. And what is hindering that? And first of all, being a teacher at the university level, I thought we were also giving some sense of possibility of actually exploring among us, seeing, okay, what is actually hindering me of doing the change that I want to see in the world? So that's part of my motivation, you might say.
Thank you so much, Bess. I think that's a beautiful reflection also about our own positions, right? As lecturers, as we work in the university, but we also, or at least that's my experience, we also grow or develop as teaching about or teaching in activist ways. So I think that's a very beautiful observation there. So Lina, would you like to follow up on Bess?
I also felt some resonance when you presented your beginning or your entry into this field of activist teaching or activist practice as an academic. You described your endeavors to try to change the disciplinary self-understanding in what was at that point your field of research or study. And for me, the point of departure was very much the same. It started with a very personal experience of being extremely limited, both in terms of how I could express myself, express the understandings that I was forming of society around me, but also what, as you also said, what kinds of knowledge are accepted as legit within an academic field, and how do these kinds of knowledge need to be brought about? So if I cannot explain how I know something as the result of a systematic methodology, then it has no space in an academic discourse. And I should say that I come from a background in sociology, and this is where I've done a lot of the research that I've also done later. And this was also the context of the teaching that Bess and I have done together. And sociology, as some of you will know, is a discipline where we study society, like social contexts that we are also ourselves part of very often, and we all know, being part of these contexts, that what we know about them is not only the product of a systematic exploration. So for me, it was extremely frustrating that I could only talk about those aspects of reality where I could very clearly point to the coming into being of these understandings, and I could only bring them forward in a text by reference to other academic texts. So other kinds of references that could facilitate. It's been so long. I'm working in a different field now where I only speak Danish, so I'm super challenged having to talk now in English. But all other kinds of references, which could also function very well as a tool for me to make clear for a reader what I am actually trying to convey, were ruled out already because they were not able to carry an academic reference. And then the real academic work started when I did a research project about how researchers and students respectively learn from the academic texts that they are reading. For the readers, for the researchers in the course of their research, for the students in the course of the term. And what I identified, and which really got to me, was that so many of the students have this sense of non-validity, or you could say that they as a collective suffer from an imposter syndrome. Only very few of them, and we can talk about the concept of habitus to understand who they are, actually felt that they were legit subjects in academia. The rest of them really struggled to feel that what they thought of the texts that they were reading, or what they thought could be an interesting object of study, or etc., was legit. And so the work, and this led them to a kind of abandonment of their own voice, of their own perspective, of those experiences that, as a sociologist and not least as an ethnographer, I believe are super important for us to understand the society that we are part of, and those social dynamics, cultural dynamics, discourses that operate out there. And so the work that I started doing was a work where I invited the students as co-researchers, but facilitated a process of autoethnographic self-studies, where I invited them to observe how they interacted with the texts, and write down those observations. And in the course of this research project, I slowly moved the emphasis in the questions that I asked them to pay attention to while they were studying their own reading and learning process, to questions of how they might relate what they were reading to whatever experience they had themselves. So I was slowly, by different means, mostly questions, pushing them into a way of relating to the texts where their own subjectivity their own repertoire of background. I don't even want to say experiences, because it's really understandings and it's insights and it's a lot of data would come into dialogue with the texts that they were reading, which also meant that what was most important for them in the text that they were reading would be those things that resonated with whatever they brought into this dialogue, instead of just reading texts to identify what is important for this writer to say. So they were actually already entering this analytical, reflective relation to the text while they were reading. They might not use it for anything, but they were practicing the tool that I identified was the same, or not the tool, maybe the muscle or the way of interacting that I had already identified that the researchers were interacting with the texts with. And now I've already spoken for a long time, but so I was planning to say something more, but I won't. I can get back to that, but I just wanted to say that these maneuvers were also part of exactly what you were talking about, Ozan, trying to shift the idea of like the disciplinary self-understanding, and more specifically the idea of which positions you can talk from when you are a student. And my ambition was especially to give space to those voices, those individuals with a habitus which is either minority voices or marginalized voices, which are those furthest away from what you could call the academic habitus. Thank you for allowing me to speak so long.
Thank you so much, Lina. I think it's very interesting already that we see that activist teaching is not only about teaching about activism or resistance, but it's also about giving voice, about academic diversity, about creating horizontal relationships with students. So it has so many facets, and we can also do activist teaching without actually teaching about activism or resistance. And I think you made that very, very clear. But Michiel does teach about activism in an activist way. So I would like to give you the floor now.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you for organizing this webinar and giving me the opportunity to say something here. So I was thinking, I think the whole reason for me to come to Wageningen University was that I was so interested in how social change was working. I came from a law school, and in a law school you don't learn about social change, and I was interested in how this would work. And so I came to anthropology, and I started teaching anthropology of law and anthropology of the state. And in my classes, I would basically be sharing a lot my own learning process of how social change works and how this works despite or thanks to the state or thanks to the law. So I would try to unpack the law and unpack the state and see what's in there and see where were the opportunities for change. Because for me, it was really important to kind of to teach the students, to enable them to kind of use their own political agency and to do something about or to work something towards or against inequalities or environmental destruction. So we would be discussing a lot with the students. Okay, what are the different opportunities that you have to actually to work towards change and to become politically active? And one of the options, of course, is activism. So activism always kind of played a role in my course in that sense. And a few years ago, we heard some complaints maybe from students that were frustrated about, okay, we learn so much in international development about all the things that are wrong with the world, but we don't learn how to deal with it, how to improve this. And so it is kind of depressing to study, and to me it was kind of, how is this possible? We so much try to teach them also about opportunities, and all they get is the depressing part. So Elizabeth and I then decided, okay, let's design a course on activism, and we called it the resistance power of movements, to kind of avoid the word of activism. But we also decided, okay, let's not design this ourselves, but let's do it together with practitioners. We call them practitioners, or they're activists that are training other activists. And we came together and we designed the course together. It was actually quite a difficult thing because what we were thinking and what they were thinking, I mean, that went just in all different directions. So that took a lot, quite interesting process, and we came up with a course that combines, say, theory on social movements, and Elisabeth and I will be talking about this and talking about their own fieldwork in cases of social movements. And then this would somehow be combined with a training that one of these trainers would give. So sometimes this was a very strong connection. For example, we would teach on framing in social movements, and then the trainer would say, okay, let's practice framing of our own actions. And sometimes it was a little bit further related. So we would be talking about decision making in social movements, and then the training would be on the theater of the oppressed or about deep democracy. So a little bit more a distance. So this, I think, is the first aspect of our course, that it is combining this theory, case studies, and practice, I guess. Another thing, we also try to combine this further by asking students to develop their own action. So they had, at the end of the course, they had to develop their own action, go out in the streets and do something, make a political action. And of course, reflect on this using all the course materials, kind of. So that's, I think, a second important aspect of this course. And the third aspect of the course, I think maybe that was maybe the most important thing, or the thing that made it so valuable to all of us, to the teachers, to the trainers, and also the students. And that's what we were really striving for, horizontal relationships between teachers, practitioners, and students. We were all learning from each other, and it was just like this big learning thing that was happening. And this was partly also because, of course, these trainers do things that we don't know, and so there was actually this opportunity to learn from everybody, and we try to make room for these horizontal relationships. For example, by taking a lot of time to listen to each other, give students the floor a lot, let them have a lot of input in what was happening in the classroom, but also by organizing it in a different way than, because normally when you and then you have like a Monday and a Wednesday, and then throughout the Josephina, your mic is on, and now not anymore. So normally you would have this scheduled course, scheduled throughout the semester, like 2 sessions every week. And we decided to do it differently. We said, okay, we will have 2 full weekends. So we started at Friday morning, and we would be together until Sunday, late in the afternoon. And we would be eating together and dancing together and drinking together and doing a lot of talk, having a walk, and also do this teaching and these trainings. And we, for example, often Elisabeth and I would also be part of the people that we would also kind of, how do you say this? We would also be trained by the trainers. We would also be the students in these training sessions. And well, I think these 3 aspects together, this combining theory and practice in different ways, and also these horizontal relationships, I think that was, for me, really what made this course. So, thank you.
Thanks, Michiel, for sharing about our experience. I just wanted, before I move on to a next question that I have for all of you, ask if one of you, Ozan, Nina, Bez, Michiel, if you would like to react or make an observation related to what has been said until now. I saw a lot of nodding, and I think it's really nice that we see all these different aspects of activist teaching in your 4 ways. Yeah, Lina, go ahead.
It's a question. The students that you sent out to do some activist action, how did they choose on what to do?
Okay, that's a good question. Well, we tried to make groups of the students, so they had to work in small groups around their interests in different kinds of activism, and then the students would be in a group, and then they would just have to decide themselves, okay, what do we want to go against, and how are we going to do this? So that we just left it to the students, basically, and we would, of course, help them think about this, and sometimes say maybe that's not a good idea for these reasons, but basically leave it to them.
Actually, what I was mostly interested, this is nice to know. What I was mostly interested is your analysis of what made them choose what they chose. So what made something attractive is the completely wrong word, but what made, yeah, what is your impression of what guided them or what led them to arrive with a certain decision on a certain subject? Or...
Yeah, okay, Lina, that's a very good question. Hannah Karina, your mic is on. Hannah Karina,
all your students.
Hannah Karina, please. Turn the mic off.
Yeah.
Okay, that
Was
works.
it solved? Yeah, it was a nice song though. But
It was a nice song, beautiful, yes. So Lina, yeah, good question. I don't think we actually made an analysis of this. Students often came in, I think, already with you know, specific concerns that was really their concerns. So they would often do an action in relation to this. But then what they would do in relation to this, yeah. What was played a big role? I think sometimes what played a big role was in, okay, what is possible? You know, let's not make it too big. Let's not make it too ambitious. And of course, this was also part of the things that they were supposed to do. Yeah, but maybe Elizabeth has a good answer to this.
Yeah, I think I also was thinking about this because I saw that the students developed different actions over the 2 years. So, and what I found interesting in the first or the past editions or last year is that students made quite some videos, and we also talked about this, and we like a way, like, so they would screen a video or like a mini documentary about racism or so, and we never really found out what was this attractiveness about the video. And I think in the first year I saw many actions were developed towards consumer behavior rather than towards the bigger system, so or a company or the university as a neoliberal institution, or but more like changing or advertising more for sustainable travel, for example. And so also in the first edition we had in a course guide that students could not engage in civil disobedience because we were a little bit afraid that they would be arrested, and then Wageningen University would be like, we didn't think that was a very good idea, but then we took that out, but no one did it. So yeah, we did not really look deeper into this. Could be very interesting. Yeah.
The reason that I asked the question is that I think if we can identify what determines what they choose on, maybe it can provide us with a shortcut to how to mobilize more.
Yeah.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah, we can still interview the students about this. It's actually
some
very
homework.
nice. Yeah. Yeah, Bess, you also wanted to say something.
I just wanted to share an observation, because it's like in our different approaches, there is still this kind of a sense of us trying to actually practice some of this relationality. You spoke of it as something like horizontal relationships, stemming from our interest of actually facilitating social change. And to me, it reminds of actually being kind of a role model, or at least inviting to different kind of making relations as a social change taking place within an academic realm. So it just like, also because what you did, Ozan, reminded me of actually like coming from yourself, having this kind of, sense making taking place, and then wanting to do something that actually changed the way that you also invite your students to reflect upon certain issues, right?
Yeah, good observation.
Yeah, I think that's what you're saying is brings us close to one of the questions. One of the questions about, can teaching be a form of activism? And I think what our teaching that Elizabeth and I engaged in was activism in the sense that it was kind of prefigurative. We tried to teach the way we think that teaching should be, I guess.
On that note, I guess it is really important to acknowledge these tensions and contradictions of the context that we are bounded with in a way. That's most of the time I feel like that I bumped into the wall of the university as the institution, because for instance, I noted that you also do not use the word activism, right? That's in our case, for instance, our program in the initial, our proposal was activist organizing for social change. And then this didn't resonate well in the Dutch context, because there is, I guess, a bit history and legacy about this understanding of activism as a bit very, negative. And then we thought, okay, then how we can, reframe it and make it more, appealing, but still having this activist status. Then we came up with the notion of social impact, organizing social impact. And also the way, trying to create this horizontal relations. This is what I tried to do since the beginning in all these different levels and layers, and creating a bit more equal relation with the student body. But then again, in the end, for instance, this marking process or the expectations of the institution. In an ideal world, for instance, I would not really give any thought of marks, grades. Probably it should be more about pass fail. If you, in a way, this is also to some extent open to conversation, but we are to some extent bounded with these kind of institutional regimes. And in these institutional regimes, then we try to navigate our way through how we can, go beyond marking, or whether we can make it more accessible or egalitarian. But still, it is very, very difficult. So that's also something that I guess we need to acknowledge, that it's not a rose garden. That's always a bit kind of trying to navigate all these kind of established power relations and institutional regimes. And then you try to, argue for something else. And then you try to also mobilize the knowledge that you generate or produce with the students. Just want to say this maybe.
Yeah, thank you, Ozan. I think this is a very important point, and I would also like to ask if the others would like to reflect a little bit on this, like the limitations that we have within the university to create these, for example, more horizontal relationships, or do other forms of teaching. How have you experienced that? This was not in my list of questions, but I think it's an important question anyway.
Lina, would you like to share, or should I start?
Go ahead, Tess, and then
Okay.
we'll probably say the same thing.
Yeah, most probably. So in my experience, just this thing of learning the students' names makes a difference. And it was to me a bit strange that not so many lecturers put in the effort of actually relating to students and being able to say, hey, what are you, when people are raising their hand, yeah, what would you like to share? And then naming them, because it seems like we are humanizing our students, and we actually engage with them and want to have a true exchange in a way, not just ticking off boxes of right and wrong answers. And I thought that's a really a significant reaction to this horizontal approach to relating together, and also inviting to having a dialogue, which is very valuable, I think, also as a learning tool. To me, at least, that's a key feature. Learning through speaking and reflecting collectively upon certain issues, instead of learning, by heart and then speaking it out in a classroom, expecting the lecturer to be approving your answer, instead of having this more open sense of, okay, now learning is taking place with a sense of insecurity, because we all of us would be meeting some sense of not knowing when we enter this kind of field. And I find that the most valuable thing to learn, to trust the sense of entering an unknown area. So that's part of it. And maybe you can continue, Lina.
Yeah, I would add two things. I think that there is this ideal of the teacher, the academic, as a thinking mind. Like everything from here and down doesn't exist, and we are in this way, like you were talking about humanizing the students, but I think we also really need to humanize ourselves. Like, for instance, when most of the students logged on, I was still eating because I just ran in from the sunshine outside, and I was super hungry and needed to eat. And this, like, making it blatantly open that I'm also a person with a need to eat is just one way among a lot of ways where you can become human in front of your students or with your students, like taking apart this image that you are just this thinking mind, not on a body but rather on a pedestal. And then the thing that I was describing in the beginning, how I was trying to facilitate, you could say, like a recentering of the reading point of view of the students, I think points very much to the core of how you can democratize the learning and the dialogue in a classroom, because you are exactly giving legitimacy to the individual learner in there. And if you are good enough at emphasizing that the success of the task is to bring the text into dialogue and not a specific dialogue, then these voices, they will not become equal, because they are always, the classroom is always positioned within the societal context, which is very hierarchical. But this is a way that we can massage, and we can create some instability in the hierarchical structure. And then, of course, also naming privilege is super important. And then I think it's also really important to make an effort to, whenever we want to name social positions, then draw the attention to the majority position instead of the, like, I was starting by saying that one of the things that I had an ambition was to create space or mobilize minority or marginalized voices. But I would always do this. I would never talk about those. I would talk about the majority positions. Yeah, okay, but this was not the hierarchy we were talking about. We were talking about the hierarchy between teacher and student. So yeah, I'll leave it with this.
Yeah, Bess, and after that, Michiel can take the floor.
Sorry, I just wanted to add something, because what you said, Ozan, was this concern around that we actually playing a part in the system, and we are part of actually contributing to the way that we actually, the things that we also like to change, and we have to play by the rules. So this sense of gaming the system, like really finding the cracks within where we have a place, or we can actually show that there would be different ways of actually providing learning into these environments that might be more efficient and more democratic and more engaging. And there's one of those, like one of you who are listening to it, made a comment saying that involve me and then I will learn. It's much more valuable. So also by allowing ourselves to experiment and have this kind of reflective learning taking place also as teacher, and as you say, Lina, becoming vulnerable as a lecturer, being humanized, and not, because we also have advantages as the ones who should be knowing, like that we can sort out things or give voice to certain perspectives, that we actually share that, okay, this is also a privilege that I have to let go of and become a certain sense of a person sharing my perspectives and listening to others. So, but really the big struggle is, okay, we also part of a big machinery, right? So we can only have a certain reach, and then we have to say, okay, what will be the next action to be taken to make a change right here? Yeah.
Ozan, would you like to react to this? Because I also wanted to give the floor to Michiel.
Maybe just very briefly then. Actually, I guess it really helps beginning the class that it's a collective learning experience. It's a collective learning journey. And then actually we will learn from each other. So I guess beginning with this assumption and saying that this is not about only you, it's not about only me, it's about the process that we engage in this period so that we can think together and we can ask different questions to each other, so that we can create a kind of, space where we can, bring up different conversations based on your experiences, based on your engagements, and then to what extent we can also go from here as a collective. I think that's also very important to acknowledge. And then And then we can talk about the limitations we have, the limitations the others have. So that's this honest and collective emphasis is very essential, I think. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, maybe very briefly, I have two things. One thing is about the grading. So Elizabeth and I, the first year we did the course, we did grading, and in the second year we said, okay, let's get rid of this. We will do the pass-fail thing, and of course everybody passed, apart from the people that stopped the course halfway. But so it was actually kind of amazing that we were so much willing to go against the grain, and still it was very difficult for us to let go of this graining, because we were so used to it, because this is the way you get students to work, blah blah blah. So now the second year we kind of okay, now let's get rid of it. So it's also something that's really that has become part of us, I think, and not just the system. And the other thing I wanted to so I'd like to talk about this humanization of both the students and the teachers. And I was thinking one thing that I also really liked about our course is that there were at the beginning the students learned to know each other, and so they introduce and tell each other about their experiences with activism. And in both years we had this huge differences, with some students say, okay, well, I really would like to do something activist, but I don't know how, and it feels very scary. And other people would have like 10 years of activism. We had somebody that had to fled his own country was a refugee from Pakistan because he had because of all his activism, and that's why he was in the Netherlands. And we had a student that practically lived in 3 camps, just living through activism. And somehow, I don't know really how that worked, but maybe partly was by emphasizing that we were there as humans, as human beings, and not as little pieces of knowledge. That somehow it worked. I think that everybody felt that no matter how much or how little experience you have, what you have to say and what you bring to the class is just as valuable. And I think that worked really well. I'm not really sure why that worked so well, but I think it worked well because we actually really got to know each other because of this. Also, maybe the setup with these weekends where you have time to talk and see each other eating. Indeed. Well, I think that is what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think also I hear this horizontalization of teaching, but also like that part of this is also making yourself vulnerable as a lecturer, right? And which is not always easy. So it can also be a little bit scary. And I think we feel because we engage also in this, that we are human beings, so you can actually talk with us or ask questions or dance or whatever. But I would like to ask, yeah, go ahead.
I think in both weekends, I'm almost everybody has been crying once, right? Yeah. Also the teachers, also the trainers. It's such an emotional experience to go through this. I think that's also against humanizing in a sense. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's an important point. But I just wanted to see if there are any questions from the public from the participants. Sorry, at this moment, because there were some questions in the chat. Whether we would open up for questions, and so maybe someone wants to ask something. You can, or do I have to unmute you, or you can ask it in the chat, or raise your hand. Unmute yourself. I think you should be able to do that. Is there anyone who would like to ask something? That's a nice question here for all of you. What could you share as your best practices as collaborative learning strategies for students? Great question, thank you. I don't know who would like to say something about this. Your best practices for collaborative learning strategies.
I'm trying to think of what this question means.
What is collaborative learning?
The best possible strategies for students.
No, I think so. Mm-hmm.
And also between students, or also collaboration with practitioners or activists. That's also something that we always think about. So I wonder whether that meant for that.
Okay, so maybe the person who asked this question needs to explain us a little bit more. You can type the question or just say it, but as we see now, it might work better to say it. So so in the meantime,
okay, I was the one who asked the question. My
okay,
name is
perfect.
Marie. Good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for sharing your insights about this topic. What I mean with the question is, I think it was mentioned earlier that we all believe that students learn by doing. And one way of decolonizing teaching and the education system is to allow learning to take place among the within the students, and therefore making it student-centered learning instead of teacher-centered. So one way of making learning student-centered is by using collaborative learning strategies. How have you been able to use collaborative learning strategies in teaching your students, and what could you share as a best practice considering the fields that you are teaching? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your elaboration on your question. Who would like to share something about this? Bess?
Yeah.
Or yeah, Bess and then Ozan.
I'll do just a quick take on it. So to me, during the summer course, the first summer course we did on this theme of researching social change, we were physically together. And to me, it was important to establish some sense of collectivity, you might call it, or sociality. It's 1 week during the summer holiday that we have like to spend together, full hours every day. And the first day I was baking buns and, asking people to bring their cups. And then we had like a circle outside in the grass because it was nice weather, and then a presentation all around this. And it created some sense of community and a sense of actually listening to each other and getting to know the diversity and the different backgrounds, meeting up here, really trying to make each other some sense of resources and having a sense of the different perspectives that were present in this group. So sociality as a fundamental feature of collective learning practices. And then the other thing is interest, that you bring forth each student's interest and they can mirror it or at least recognize it in what they're engaging with. So a sense of natural motivation, you might call it, or well, I feel very privileged when working with university students and they come to a course, they voluntarily seek it out and they devote their time to it. So at least there is a sense of a huge engagement and you can call it an interest, but this sense of actually motivating them, like existentially maybe even, to go into this process of doing something that they would like to see as something changing, an area where they are engaged with. I think that was just my like basic thoughts on it.
Thank you. Thank you, Bess, for sharing. Ozan.
I just want to add to what Bess already said in terms of collective and community feeling. But before I also need to mention, for instance, that I am in a kind of privileged environment, that I work with very small group of students, and I have been in Turkey. I got my undergrad there. I also taught in New Zealand, and there were classes like 80, 90 people. So how you can really build a kind of collaboration environment. So there are always this kind of restrictions. And again, you try to find a way how you can create a kind of community environment. If you have the opportunities and if you have the possibilities, then what I would do is, just as Bess said, to create a kind of collective community feeling. And this is what we try to do in our master's program, that with also, I see that also within class, there are these collaborative opportunities where you simply ask these students to form groups throughout the semester, and then come to class with some pre-discussed discussion questions, so that they already engage with each other, and also they kind of discuss whether they really grasp the idea of, for instance, a kind of journal article, or they miss something, or whether they can relate this argument or whatever it is to their own daily life. So that's a kind of way of building a community in the class. And also then we can also think about a larger scale, building community around the program, around the course. But before going into much larger scale, I also want to emphasize, again, it is really important to set the scene in the beginning, given the parameters where we have within the boundary conditions, that we should create a kind of environment that where everyone can feel okay to say, yeah, I do not agree with this, I contest this idea, or, you know, there should be also, these may sound quite basic, but I guess this should be our role as teachers, which I would also say like facilitators of this kind of conversations, facilitators of this kind of knowledge generation that take place in class. So once we establish this kind of environment, then again, we can think about that this group work and really working hands-on kind of learning process, where also the partners or practitioners can come into the scene. In our case, very briefly, and then I'll stop. For instance, in one course, our colleagues talk about bottom-up grassroots organizations, and we were invited, actually we tried to establish a time and space where our students cook together with this grassroots organization who is offering day shelter for undocumented migrants. I think that's a perfect example of collaborative learning experience, so that despite, of course, these people are quite vulnerable, and also our students might seem quite privileged. So how you really make sense of this, what kind of power imbalances there are, and how you can manage this as a student, as a facilitator, and in the organizational context as well. And then you reflect. What have we done? Why we have done? What's the point? And is it just a journey that we take there, or is it more building kind of relation with the partner organization? So that's why also we do not believe a kind of extractive gaining knowledge as a sort of calling thesis. We believe in building longer term partnerships where the university becomes an anchor, or the program becomes an anchor, and then you build these collaborative strategies, not only within the class, but also with the partner organization. So in the long run, the social change effect can take place, not only through the students, but also through these kind of engagements with the organizations. And I'll stop here for now.
Yeah, thank you. But Ozan, this is also very inspiring to see how all these relations and partnerships, that this is all part of the teaching and creating this environment in which this can all become. Michiel, do you also want to react to this? And then we can go to, I think there are some questions.
Yeah, maybe very briefly. I think we did a number of things to kind of get this collaborative learning experience. And one thing is that we asked all students at the beginning to tell us about their personal learning goals. So this would be part would become part of where we would want to go in these weekends. Another thing that we did, we asked students to come up with what would be important ground rules for them. So how would we engage with each other during these weekends? And so we kind of make these ground rules together, and the students come with the ground rules, and we just discuss them, and we have a set of ground rules, and they're put on the wall. Another thing, maybe very briefly, this is something that what Ozan has been talking about, how this can be an anchor, how the court can be an anchor, for something happening at universities. That's also something that Elisabeth and I want to work to. That's something that we call activist academy, something that we would like to set up, so that students, there are quite a number of students, also teachers, that are interested in activism, but don't have a home to do this. And we somehow want to provide this home.
Yeah, so this could also be like a first steps towards like establishing this community, right? So thank you, Michiel. I see some hands. So Lucy, would you like to present your question? Hi, Lucy.
Yeah, thanks. Hi. Thanks, everyone. This has been super inspiring, and I'm struggling to put this into concise phrasings. But I've always been really a fan of this collaborative forms of learning, where you say we are all learning here together, and where you also emphasize that Western academia doesn't hold the monopoly on knowledge, and there's like different ways of knowing. But there were also moments where I found myself kind of on a slippery slope towards like post-truth, post-fact. And so I'm just curious how people kind of navigate this, because on one hand, you try to be a co-learner, you are also trying to be the facilitator, as Ozan was saying, but then also you do know things that the students don't necessarily know, or there's like a lot of you know, there might be misconceptions or biases. Yeah, so I'm wondering if anyone has some advice on this. Thanks.
Thanks, Lucy. Yeah, this is a very complicated question. Who wants to share, Michiel?
Okay, I think it's an interesting question. I think what would happen in our course if such a situation would develop where it becomes unclear, you know, what is the truth again? I think then the community there, the people that are there, they know, okay, if it's more about this, then, you know, whatever Michiel or Elizabeth says, you know, kind of becomes the truth. And if it's more about something else, then one of these trainers is kind of more, has more authority. I think there's some kind of shared authority or distributed authority about these things. And yeah, not really a good answer, but I think it works a bit in that way.
Thanks, Michiel. Yeah, it's complicated because still, I mean, I see what Lucy says. We know stuff, you know, we know the theories, we know. So how to go about this, like in this post-truth. Yeah, is there anyone who has more? Yeah, or how do you do this, Nina, and then Ozan?
Yeah, I think my approach would always begin with asking the students to elaborate, like trying to find out, so this point of view that they're presenting or this understanding or whatever, what is it based on? To try to, like, at the same like if I feel that what they're saying is untrue, then instead of just saying I don't agree, because as Michiel said, it's really difficult to disassemble our position of like truth authority in a learning space, but and it can also really easily demotivate further presentations of maybe from other students or from the same students. So I would always engage by asking questions and trying to actually also have an open mind towards whether there could be a foundation for actually considering this point of view, or in the process it will become evident that maybe the truth presented is not very well based. So I don't think that it's always necessary to say what you're saying is not true because I know this and this and this, but you can actually take an explorative approach where maybe the truth presented turns out to be quite fragile in its foundation, and maybe it's just a point of view.
Yeah, so it's again like about the dialogue as well, right? What you say. Yeah. Thank you, Ozan, and then we go to the next question.
That's a very good question, actually, because when you come from a particular normative position, then of course you are questioned on what basis you argue about this and what about other positions and perspectives. And I say it's that, yeah, my understanding is that there are claims about truth. So how can we understand about these claims? And then, as Lina said, yeah, what are the assumptions behind this claim? And then we can open up this conversation and try to see whether there is a ground for this kind of argumentation, or whether this argumentation doesn't have a ground, and to see actually this ground may have also problematic assumptions. This happens particularly, for instance, about the assumption that the science or the university is a neutral institution, or the claims about truth are neutral assumptions or objective assumptions. But by asking these kind of questions, sorry, it's getting dark here because of this changing lighting system. So by asking these questions, actually, you make explicit that there are these already assumptions that are bounded with the power relations. And our role should be to demonstrate that there are these claims, there are these kind of power embedded assumptions embedded into power relations. and to what extent these change and shape the way we understand. Once you bring this mirror into class, then immediately actually show that what is presented as neutral or objective or whatever is actually quite ideological. And then you suddenly bring this ideological and hegemonic dimension into classroom, and then lots of questions and other claims of truth come into scene. And then the other argument might be, unless another better explanation comes, these are the things we have, and these are open for contestation. Particularly in social science, you can talk about economics like supply and demand, but also you can explain how there are exploitation or the labor theory of value. How are we going to make sense of this? They are talking both, I'm extremely simplifying here, of course. We are talking about economics here, but as you can see, there are different claims on how to explain economics. What are we going to do with this then? Let's look at the ground. Let's look at the assumptions. Let's look at why we think like that. So that would be, I guess, one of the ways, at least this is what I try to do in classroom.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think this is, you are trying to get the light on. Okay, those. This is very important also to what Ozan says, that everything that we choose as a theory or as a story, it's always a choice. It's never just like a neutral thing that's out there, and it's always debatable as well, right? So I'm going to take, there are two, and then first I'm going to give Bess the word in a bit, and then I'm going to take the two questions that have their hands raised, and then there are two questions in the chat, just so you know that I have seen you. Bess, you wanted to say something?
It was just the questions in the chat. I just wanted to, to be equally observant about that.
Thank you. So first we go to Julia, to your question. Okay. Okay. Cesar, you're next in line. Then we will go to the chat questions. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. Many of the things that people have said already are adding to my main concerns that I want to share, and kind of slash questions, or I would like to listen what you think about this. I am a PhD candidate, and I teach, and I also like the facilitator role more than the teacher, and the teaching learning experience inside the classroom, instead of saying like this is a lecture-based space, whatever. And I have been engaging with post-colonial and decolonial thinking in our class. It happened very organically. I was invited by a couple of colleagues, a senior scholar and a former PhD candidate. And then the three of us looked at the ways in which we wanted to design these things, the syllabus and the dynamic. First, since I started as a PhD candidate, I had been questioned by the managers in the department where I work. How would they be sure that I could be able to divide and separate my activism, or whatever they understand by that, because that's also another thing that it's never clear what is activism, and my academic work. In fact, the question was like, how do we make sure that your activism is not going to stand on the way or interfere with your academic work? People who know me and in the community where I live know that I'm engaging with communities outside the university, and I see these very necessary, first, to be consequent with the things that I'm trying to express in my academic work, but second also because of these long-term transformations that I'm really aiming to integrate in my practice and my thinking. Something Austin already talked about. I'm thinking on how to build longer-term relationships with these communities outside the university, because I believe that this is one of the fundamental things that we should be caring for in academia. Let's say, like, the research not being the outcome of the research, where do we move from there? No, the research being the transformative process to add to something outside the university. So concretely, I would like to listen to your opinions first. As a person of color, the power relationships in the classroom, in a teaching predominantly white groups of students, is something super challenging. It's something that has drained our energies and capacities. Is something that poses very big questions and very big challenges, no? Because also it goes in different ways, this power unevenness, no? Like the students there and me as a worker of the university, but me as having like a temporary contract, and my managers and the people designing the coordinating the masters and the bachelors, etc., etc. So it goes in very different levels. What do we do with this? Because what I see also in the so-called activist spaces and scenes that I participate outside are very similar challenges. Not long ago, I was in a big meeting of activists in broad, doing something for people without documents living in Europe. A predominantly also white group. They were seeing that in past years they have been lacking of a self-criticism of white supremacy, white privilege, etc., etc. They dedicated, like in our meeting, a very long space initiated by our white peers to discuss these things among white peers. I don't, and I like that, you know, I don't see that happening in my department, for instance. I don't see that happening with my colleagues. I don't see the faculty board or you know, the people making the decisions making room for this. And this aligns a little bit with something that was said. How do we make room for this with the precarious contracts that we have? So just these two things maybe help for the conversation. Thank you very much for sharing everything that you have. Thanks.
Yeah, and thank you so much for sharing as well. And I'm going to ask the speakers to answer, obviously, but to try to be a little bit on point, so we have enough time for the questions that are still there. Thank you so much. I don't know, who can I give the word? Who wants to react to these 2 points raised by Cesar? Yeah, yes, go ahead.
I'm sure we all have something to say in this, but first of all, Nina and I was together this weekend where we spoke about these questions, and this also came up about how to give voice to those who are marginalized, or, you know, not speaking forth the differences, but actually saying that we are all part of categorizations, and actually making the majority reflect upon, like you just shared, Cesar, that this sense of speaking about white supremacy from a white perspective might open up to, oh, how does it feel to be like categorized as something special? Or how does it feel like, oh, I have this certain status, to just become much more, a sense of vulnerability, maybe, to actually be more, have a sense of humility, of actually categorizing each other. What does it do to us? And how do we position ourselves in terms of each other? Because to me, at least, there's very much about the way we relate to each other within creating some sense of change, the way that we are, giving each other legitimacy, that they will actually do something towards the way we are conceiving each other, and who we take decisions or be part of decision taking. So that's at least one thing. And there was another. But it's just the feeling of actually also being in a vulnerable position as one who has this precariousness. I think that's something for us academics to reflect upon, how to be inclusive, not to put ourselves, out there without having someone taking our backs, like relating towards these issues with a sense of solidarity, that how to criticize the system we are part of, if not someone, backing us up concretely, instead of being the one scholar who is like raising issues that's important for all of us, because we all become precarious if none speak up for these kind of issues that been, global, I guess, and that we are just being like made frightened of losing our jobs if we speak our minds, and having this existential engagement also, that we are still being asked to divide ourselves into a professional part where we do this objective kind of learning things, and then a personal one that should be excluded from the academic area. I find that very old-fashioned, but also a place where we can be very threatened, right, by others, because we are actually engaged in what we learn. And are we then politicizing our teaching? Many things can come out on that occurrence.
Yeah, very important points, Bess. Someone else, Ozan or Michiel, you want to react, and then I go to Julia. Yeah, Ozan.
Since it was mentioned about building partnerships, I guess, Cesar, that was one of the questions. This is just an additional task. It's just an additional care that you want to build with the other organizations who are also suffer from lack of funding, lack of resources, and then you just try to convince them that there might be something out of this kind of relation, not in a kind of instrumental or transactional way. It is more like, we believe in social change. You are doing in social change. You are in the field. Let's try to bring forces together. It has been very, very difficult, and I just see that, for instance, I spent around a year in order to build a kind of network that tried to bring these organizations, who then also became partners for the master program. But immediately you could see that they are not resourceful, they are under pressure, and then you are also you are perceived as also the institution, the university who has the money. But actually, I am just a kind of lecturer in this kind of environment, and I do not have funds that I can provide for making things easier. So I think we should begin with, it might sound cynical, but I should begin with a kind of realistic analysis where we are, what kind of power relations we are part of, what are the possibilities within the boundary conditions, and how we can mobilize them. So in the end, I can again say that I was relatively privileged that I have time for research, and I use this time for research to visit these organizations, to tell about this. Let's work together. Let's think about social change together in a simple way. And then you can come to class as a guest lecturer, but I am sorry, but I do not have funding to to cover your hours that you spend here. But next time, perhaps we organize a workshop and there will be no fee at all, so that we can actually exchange, knowledge and practice. So these are the ways, I guess, we can try. So what we have as resources, sort of knowledge, right? This is what we are paid for. This is kind of, I'm not saying that we are the experts and the knowledge heroes. We are
deze
paid for,
workshop gemist, helaas. Van de week had ik me opgedaan.
Sorry, we are still in a workshop. Yeah.
So my point is,
yeah.
we are paid for this kind of doing something for knowledge, and then we may have spaces, we may have classes. So these might be the things that we can actually mobilize and try to build these kind of partnerships. But it takes time, it takes effort, it takes quite a much care.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Ozan. I really also like what you mentioned about this knowledge exchange. So it is also something that we can be quite active in, I think, and finding different ways of exchanging. And I'm just looking at the time, because we are already running out of time, but I still wanted to give the floor to Julia, and also to, I think that the questions in the chat might have been partly answered, but and then Noor, we will have to see if we still get to your questions. Sorry, Julia, did you fix your audio? We cannot hear you, and you are unmuted. So in the meantime, Julia, I'm looking at the chat, and I think we partly talked about this at one of the other questions. It's how do you go about the dilemma of the activist bias as part of your wider academic engagement? I don't know if one of you would like to briefly reflect on this while Julia is fixing or trying to fix her audio issues. Maybe Michiel.
Yeah, I was reading the question and I was not really sure what was meant with it, so I'm not really sure where I should go with my answer. Sorry.
Okay, someone else? Bess?
So is it this sense of being divided, like the activist bias that we
Yeah,
are?
I think, yeah.
Yeah,
I
so
think that's where it's going.
In Denmark, we had a huge debate, a politically initiated debate about us scholars being activists and being scolded for it. And it brought a lot of discussion towards whether it was specific themes where you were suddenly an activist scholar because you raised issues that the politicians who took the initiative to making this debate, they were disagreeing, or whether it was like a specific way of doing research. And to me, it was at least making me aware of this can easily be politicized, right? That we can be, hang out or pointed out to be not true scholars, but actually have some kind of ideology within our teaching. And I think, of course, we have to be very, very aware of what we're doing and present it in ways that are very inclusive to others' perspectives. But in the case of our summer school, the title of the course, as previously mentioned, was Researching Social Change. So there was some kind of, a circularity within the course, like the aim of the course was actually doing some kind of research on how do we produce social change? And that could be social change in any directions, right? But students were pointed out to engage with what they were interested in, to see a change within a university setting or within a more sustainable way of livelihood. And I think that if we really try to still keep the sense of I don't know, legitimacy is not the right word, but we have certain boundaries within our professional training, right? And if we point to, okay, there will be certain limits. I'm not starting out an organization within university, supporting a free Tibet. That will be my, another kind of activism that I will do in my spare time, right? So this sense of actually saying, okay, within this setting, I can do this and this, but I can for sure raise awareness on how to engage in societal issues as an academic. And that should be possible for us.
Thank you so much, Bess. I think that was very insightful. So I want to dwell a little bit on the last question here in the chat about how, I will just read it out for you. Could you share some insights or reflections on how you have made space for these alternative approaches within your institution and in hierarchies? And what is the role of relationships in this process? I think we touched briefly on some of the aspects of this question, but maybe one of you could elaborate or dwell a little bit on this question. Ozan or Michiel, I think maybe.
Yeah, I think I would just like to acknowledge this issue. This is a big issue. I think if you are still trying to get tenure, to get a job that is secure, then doing all these kind of things, may work against you, depending on who, of course, is assessing you. But so from my own comfortable position, I've been involved also in activism, and at some point I had a PhD student that wanted to kind of support this kind of activism, but in the end, okay, she did deliver the support, but anonymously. She didn't want to put her name under it, because she said, if I put my name under it, I kind of make my own research impossible. I cannot. And this was about palm oil plantations in Indonesia. He said, if I sign this petition, then I will never get a research visa for Indonesia again. So yeah, this is a big problem. But so how to find space for this? Yeah, yeah, good question.
Yeah, thank you, Michiel. Ozan, you have also a brief reflection on this, because
I think that's a very fair and right question, that how with the vulnerabilities we have, also like Michiel, I'm now sitting from my own office in a university, and I also find very difficult. And also when I was a PhD student, I find very difficult to listen to all these established scholars telling about, yeah, follow your passion, you will find your way. Fine, but what about the structural inequalities, you know, about all these different power relations in different contexts, different institutions? I do not have a right answer or one answer here. Actually, it's all about some choices, some strategic actions, sometimes compromising. I'm sorry, maybe it sounds a bit not idealistic, but this is how I see, in a way, that you navigate in between these kind of spaces, places, relations, and then you try to crave a bit space and link this space with some other, you know, colleagues who have this kind of ideals, so that you feel like that you are not alone. You are part of a collective, in a way, that you share these ideals, and then you try to get organized for your rights. I guess these are the things that might be very, yeah, very problematic in a way, but also some hopeful suggestions from my perspective.
yeah, thank you.
Maybe one of the ways and I've been dealing with this is that we wanted to have a course about activism and we called it something else.
Yeah, and just
one kind of a little bit hide what you're doing and still do what you want to do.
I also just want to add, actually, this was Bess already indicated, that we are also very precarious. Despite the whole assumption that we have all these jobs and things, last year or 2 years ago, for instance, I can't recall exactly, very established colleagues in University of Leicester School of Management got kicked out. They lost their jobs just because they were doing some critical political economic work in a business school. So then, you know, how can we really deal with this kind of larger scale understanding of what is critical work, what is the role of critical work in the university? These are all struggles. These are all ongoing challenges right in front of us, and we try to find a way. And I really appreciate, for instance, coming together with you here with like-minded colleagues, that we share our frustrations, vulnerabilities, and with the new generation coming, this is the way. But we are here, you are there, and you may have some capacity, we may have some capacity. Yeah. Let's keep this capacity as much as possible, and that's, I guess, what we can do.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ozan. I think this is also important to recognize that for us it is easier with like a fixed permanent contract, but it's also can still be a struggle, and it's really great to see all these people together here, because yeah, you don't know how wide is the interest in this topic, because sometimes you feel lonely when you are in your university room, like thinking of all this cool stuff, and then bumping into all these walls and ceilings, and so this is so great to have all these people together here. And I think, Bess, you wanted to react, and then I have to close like the formal part of the webinar. Maybe we can stay behind for those who still want to say something. But Bess, I wanted to give you the floor.
Thank you. I'll try to keep it brief. So one of the students, having non-experience of being an activist herself, was actually reflecting from the latter part of the summer course, saying, well, you can do micro activism. So we can do activism within a very small scale, maybe be it raising an issue at a meeting at the faculty, or, you know, speaking to a colleague of something that you're very engaged with. So we can always find small spaces of action, or at least sharing our perspective and trying to make the other one listen to us. So I guess that's also a possibility. If we're not changing the whole world, we might change a little bit.
Yeah, so that's the hope part, right? So that's great. Yeah. Well, well, thank you so much, all of you, and also for all the people that came, and for all your only your existence is also resistance. Yeah. Thank you so much. It was really great. All your questions, and there are still some questions that we have not even discussed. I also had a whole list of backup questions in case there wouldn't be any questions. So I guess we are not done yet with discussing this topic. But for now, I would like to wish you all a great evening, and thank you so much for being here. I will stay still for a little bit here in this space. Maybe the others want to as well, but I just wanted to end formally the webinars for the people that want to go. But if you still want to ask a question, you can just stay here. But I just wanted to thank you all. It was really great having you all here. So thanks for that. So while the people are leaving, I don't know, Julia or Noor, if you still want to.
Can you hear me now?
Floor.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
That's a struggle, I'm so sorry. In all of that, the waterfall on my keyboard, and then, yeah. Anyway.
Okay, yeah.
I want to say it's a little bit intimidating talking in this meeting because teachers and I'm just a second year student at the Faculty of Anthropology at the Vrije University of Amsterdam. And I'm really happy that teachers share with me this webinar. You share a lot of interesting things, and I feel I'm just at the beginning of my process of learn more about education and the production of knowledge and create a critical idea about that. That is something that really concerns me in general about education, also the bias, especially in the academic field, the production of knowledge. And I would like to hear from you because from what I get, this activist teaching, it comes from a need, from something that is not okay in the university, the academic field. So I would like to know what is your main critique of the academic field and in general how the university works. What do you think is the main problem there?
I'm sorry, could you maybe repeat your question again? Because sometimes it's the sound is a little bit like.
I understand. So it's basically what's your main critique of about university and in general, like academic field, to then go for the activist teaching?
I'm not sure I really understand your question, but maybe I also don't have to answer it, so that's easy. But maybe some others. Sorry. And great to have you.
As far as I understand, the question is, what is your main critique of the university right now as an institution or as the academic life field?
I just interrupt because I have to say goodbye now.
Okay, yeah, go.
Thank you for all the sharing.
I also need to go.
Okay, just go. Thank you so much. Yeah. It was great to have you. We'll be in touch, right?
Will.
Good evening.
Good evening. Yeah, so awesome. Go ahead.
It felt like that I talked too much, and I really do not want to occupy any space further. But it is a big question in the end. What we should understand from the university and how it doesn't work. So in terms of knowledge production, there are a couple of things about, of course, this precarization, the precarious working conditions for the new generation, particularly a competitive environment. The publish or perish logic also turning into grant or perish logic, and also there are other big questions about the role of the scholarship. What is our role? Should we teach? Should we do research? Should we bring grants? Should we engage with social impact? You know, it's like a kind of schizophrenic idea that we are asked to do many things at one time in a limited time. So that's a very identity problem about the role of scholarship. On the other hand, institutionally, for instance, the way publishing mechanism, the way publishing system works also is quite problematic. It is literally exploitation of academic free labor, that we do write the stuff, and then it was reviewed by our colleagues without any monetary or without any kind of supportive exchange, and then this is appropriated by the publishing companies, and then they are sold to university libraries in exchange of taxpayer money. So that's a huge scam in a way, that we do all the work and the publishing companies just sell the volumes of journal articles to universities, which are only accessible by the university, by the way. So it's not also accessible for other readers. So there are multiple layers, multiple complexities about when we say university, and also the hierarchical relations, the established relations, all these kind and gendered, relations, or there are all these kind of problems embedded into this kind of university. But there are also, it's also a place of hope, where you meet with lovely people, lovely ideas, so that you actually begin thinking about life and the world in a different way, right? And I think that should be also the role of the university in a way. Again, without saying that one size fits all, there are multiple assumptions, multiple claims about truth. University is the place where we can learn from these multiple claims. And then we pick our side, we pick our fights, if you want. And then, yeah, we just go forward. That's my understanding. Maybe Michiel would like to add to this.
No, thank you, Ozan. I think you put it down nicely, and very a lot of information already about this. I think there's just one thing that I would like to add, and which is perhaps typical for Wageningen, or maybe most typical, maybe it's true for Wageningen, but also for other universities, but it's really true for Wageningen, and that's the influence of big multinational companies on what is happening in Wageningen. So a lot of the money is coming from there. On our campus, there are university buildings, but there's also Unilever, there's the big companies right there on campus, and this is really kind of distorting, I think, the kind of truth that can still be produced in our university. Just to add to your long list of other complaints.
Yeah, I think this is also very Wageningen indeed. Yeah. What I like a lot is also like this element of hope, right? That we have to hang on to, like also while working in a university. And I heard that various times during this webinar, and I like that. So I also almost have to leave, but I don't know. I saw Noor also had her hand raised, so I don't know if that's still relevant, or has your answer? Are you still here? Oh yeah, you're here. Yeah.
Already been discussed. I just wanted to stick around at the end because it was so fun.
Nice. Thank you for that. Yeah. Okay, well, Michiel, I will see you soon, and Ozan, we will keep in touch, because this was really great. I really loved it, and it's obvious that there is so much more that we have to talk about and to do and to engage in, and so this is like just the beginning for me. So yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for organizing, and indeed, let's keep in touch, Ozan. I think it will be good.
Would love to.
Yeah.
Would love to, definitely.
Yeah, we have to. We will write a book about activist teaching. Right?
Yes, let's do that, and learn more about this teaching. Yeah.
Thanks for the organization, Nazareth. I really thank you for this, and also for all the other speakers, and also for the contributors or
yeah, it was great. It was all just great. Yeah. So
thank you
for those who are still here. Thanks for sticking around, and have a great evening. And well, yeah, let's talk soon. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Ja, dat is echt leuk.
Ja, vond ik ook.
Nou, ik ga nu uitloggen. Ik heb met mijn zusje afgesproken. Dus
Oké.
doei. Tot gauw.